Triplet babies abandoned at a garbage dump. 25 years later, a miracle shocks everyone. What if the only home you ever knew was the cold, unforgiving streets? What if survival meant making impossible choices, choices that could cost you your soul? And after decades of suffering, could love truly bring you back from the darkness? Dear family, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to support us and stay for this powerful story. Now let's begin. The night had settled over Chicago like a heavy, merciless shroud, its frigid grip stretching into every forgotten corner of the city. A bitter wind whistled through the narrow alleyways, carrying with it the scent of damp concrete, rotting food, and the quiet misery of those left behind. Streetlights flickered in the distance, their dim glow barely touching the shadows that clung to the brick walls like ghosts of lost souls. Deep within one of these alleys, in a place no one looked twice at, 3 newborns lay huddled together. Their bodies, impossibly small, trembled against the icy pavement. They had no cradle, no blankets, no gentle hands to rock them to sleep. Only the feeble warmth of each other's fragile bodies, and the cold, unfeeling night pressing in from all sides. A discarded newspaper, its edges curling with dampness, fluttered across the ground before coming to rest against the smallest of the 3. The ink had smudged, but one word remained clear: forgotten. Somewhere in the distance, the wail of a police siren echoed through the streets, a brief, haunting reminder that the city never truly slept. Footsteps pounded against the sidewalk, hurried and careless, as people rushed home to the warmth of their apartments, their dinner tables, their families. But here, in this isolated pocket of darkness, time moved differently. The world continued on, oblivious to the 3 tiny lives abandoned in its shadows. The wind picked up, curling through the alley like a living thing, seeking out every gap in the tattered rags wrapped around the infants. The strongest of the 3, a boy with limbs that flailed weakly against the cold, let out a faint cry, less a demand, more a plea. Beside him, his brother barely stirred, his breath shallow, his tiny fists curled inward as if trying to hold on to the warmth slipping away. The third, a girl with wide, dark eyes, did not cry. She simply lay there, staring at the world with quiet bewilderment, as if already understanding a truth too cruel to be spoken. No one was coming. Rats scurried between rusted trash cans, their sleek bodies disappearing into the shadows as the wind howled through the alley. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shapes against the wall, the light unable to reach where the infants lay. Above them, beyond the rooftops, the city pulsed with life, laughter spilling from late-night diners, car horns blaring, music drifting from apartment windows. But none of it reached here. Here there was only silence, only emptiness. Somewhere beyond the alley's mouth, someone might have passed by. A stranger perhaps, pulling their coat tighter against the wind, walking briskly with their head down. Maybe they glanced toward the alley, saw only darkness, and kept moving. Maybe they heard a sound, a weak, muffled cry, but convinced themselves it was nothing. Or maybe they simply didn't hear at all. The seconds stretched into minutes, and the minutes into something heavier, something that threatened to swallow the newborns whole. The night was long, and the cold was patient. The city had already forgotten them. But then, a sound. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Dragging slightly as if the weight of 1,000 lost years bore down upon them. They echoed against the walls, breaking the stillness, growing closer. For the first time that night, something shifted in the darkness. The figure emerged at the far end of the alley, her frail silhouette barely distinguishable against the darkness. Margaret walked with slow, deliberate steps, her thin frame swallowed by the oversized coat that did little to keep out the bitter cold. One hand clutched a plastic bag filled with empty bottles, things she could trade for a few coins, while the other pressed the fabric of her coat tighter against her chest. The wind had long since numbed her fingers, but she hardly noticed. When you spent enough winters on the streets, the cold became a familiar companion, one that gnawed at your bones but never quite killed you. She had spent the night like so many before, searching for discarded food, for anything of value that others had thrown away. Hunger had become a constant presence, A dull ache she no longer bothered to fight. But tonight, something felt different. A strange heaviness pressed against her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. She had learned to trust those instincts, to listen when something in the air whispered that change was coming. And then she saw them. Margaret stopped mid-step, her breath catching in her throat. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. Her vision wasn't as sharp as it used to be, and exhaustion had a way of making shadows dance where there were none. But then she heard it, a sound so faint, so fragile, she almost mistook it for the wind. A whimper. She took a hesitant step forward. The alley was still, the dim light barely reaching the three small bundles lying on the frozen ground. Her chest tightened as she moved closer, each step slow, deliberate, as if afraid the scene before her would vanish. 3 newborns. They were impossibly small, wrapped in thin, tattered cloths that offered no real protection against the cold. One stirred slightly, a tiny fist twitching as if grasping for something that wasn't there. The second barely moved, his breath so faint Margaret feared he had already slipped away. And the third, her wide, dark eyes locked onto Margaret's, unblinking, silent, waiting. A shudder passed through Margaret that had nothing to do with the cold. She looked around, searching for some sign of the person who had left them. A mother retreating into the night? Someone watching from the shadows, regretting their decision? But the alley was empty. The city had already turned its back on these children. Margaret's body tensed. She should walk away. It was the only thing that made sense. She had no home, no food, no way to care for herself, let alone 3 helpless babies. If she picked them up, if she made them hers, she would be dooming all 4 of them to a fight they could never win. Her fingers twitched, gripping the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. But she couldn't move, because she had been here before. Not in this alley, not on this night. But she had felt this pain, this terrible, gut-wrenching grief. She had once held a child of her own, a boy with soft curls and a laugh that could make the world feel kind, even when it wasn't. She had sung to him at night, whispered promises against his skin, sworn she would protect him no matter what. And then, in a single cruel moment, he was taken from her. She had begged, screamed, called out to a world that didn't listen. And now, decades later, 3 tiny souls lay before her, abandoned in the same unforgiving world that had abandoned her. And if she walked away, if she left them to the cold, who was she then? Her body moved before her mind could argue. She knelt, her knees pressing into the frozen ground, her joints protesting the motion. With trembling hands, she reached out, gathering the first child into her arms. He barely weighed anything. The second, just as light, let out the faintest sigh as she lifted him. And the third, the girl with the dark, knowing eyes, remained silent as Margaret pulled her close, pressing them all against her chest. They were cold, too cold. Tears stung her eyes as she curled her body around them, shielding them as best she could. "I don't know who you are," she murmured, voice breaking, "but you belong to me now." She held them tighter, as if sheer will alone could keep them alive. She didn't know how she would feed them. She didn't know where she would take them, but she would find a way. With slow, steady steps, Margaret rose to her feet, 3 fragile lives clutched in her arms, and walked forward, away from the alley, away from the past, into the unknown. The city had begun to stir. Margaret felt the change in the air as dawn crept over the horizon, the first weak streaks of light slipping between the buildings. The night had been long, longer than any she could remember, but she had kept moving, her arms wrapped tightly around the fragile bodies pressed against her chest. She hadn't known where she was going. There was no plan, no destination, only the undeniable truth that she couldn't leave them behind. Her legs ached from walking, her joints stiff and protesting every step. The cold had settled deep into her bones, an old enemy she had long grown used to, but the weight in her arms was something new. They were so light, too light. She had pressed her cheek against their tiny heads throughout the night, checking, listening, making sure they were still breathing. And now, as the city blinked awake around her, she faced a new reality. They were hungry, and so was she. Margaret had spent years surviving on the streets, learning which alleys were safest to sleep in, which dumpsters sometimes held scraps that hadn't yet spoiled. She knew which store owners were quick to chase her off and which ones simply looked the other way. But surviving alone was different from surviving with 3 mouths to feed. She stopped beneath an old awning, shifting her grip on the babies. Their tiny faces were still, peaceful, but she could feel the shallow rise and fall of their breaths. The wind had died down, but the morning chill still clung to the air. She needed to find food, and she needed to name them. She wasn't sure why that thought struck her so suddenly, but it did. Maybe because a name meant something. A name was proof that you existed, that you mattered, that you were more than just another forgotten soul swallowed by the streets. Margaret glanced down at the baby boy in her left arm, the one who had kicked against the cold with a fight too big for his tiny body. He was strong, resilient. Charlie. The second boy had barely stirred through the night, his breath so faint she had checked more than once to make sure he was still with her. He was smaller, delicate in a way that made her chest ache. Sam, and the girl, the one with those wide, knowing eyes that had stared up at her in the alley, silent but watchful. Lily. Charlie, Sam, and Lily. Margaret whispered their names under her breath, as if speaking them aloud would make them more real, as if it would bind them together, solidify the impossible bond that had already formed between them. A few early risers had begun to appear on the sidewalks, bundled in heavy coats, hands stuffed into their pockets, moving quickly to escape the lingering bite of the morning air. Margaret pulled her coat tighter around the babies, stepping away from the awning, her mind already calculating her next move. She knew where to go. There was a bakery 3 blocks away, Mr. Henderson's place. He wasn't exactly friendly, but he wasn't cruel either. Over the years, he had tossed her an old roll or a piece of stale bread when no one was watching. It wasn't much, but it had been enough to keep her going on the worst nights. By the time she reached the shop, the scent of fresh bread filled the air, warm and comforting. Her stomach clenched. Hunger had become an old companion, but today it was sharper, more insistent. She lingered outside the door, hesitant. She had never begged outright. Not here, not to him. She had always taken what was thrown her way without asking, without meeting his eye. But now she wasn't alone. Taking a breath, she stepped forward. The bell above the door jingled as she pushed it open, the warmth inside hitting her immediately. It smelled like butter and flour, like cinnamon and something sweet. The kind of smells that reminded people of home, of comfort, of things Margaret hadn't known in a long time. Mr. Henderson stood behind the counter, a flour-dusted apron tied around his thick waist. He was a large man with deep lines on his face, the kind carved by years of hard work rather than age. He was stacking loaves onto a tray when he noticed her, his brows pulling together in the same wary expression he always wore when she got too close to his shop. Margaret swallowed hard. "Please," she said quietly, shifting the babies in her arms just enough for him to see. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, then something else. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her, at them. Then with a gruff sigh, he turned and reached for something behind the counter. A loaf of bread, one of yesterday's, likely too stale to sell, but still good enough to eat. He wrapped it in brown paper and placed it on the counter, his movements rough, impatient. "Take it," he muttered, "and don't make a habit of this." Margaret nodded, her throat tightening. She wanted to say thank you, wanted to explain that she didn't know what she was doing, that she had nothing but these children and a promise she didn't know how to keep. But she didn't. She just took the bread, cradled the babies closer, and stepped back toward the door. As she turned to leave, she thought she heard him mutter something under his breath. "You're out of your damn mind, lady." Maybe she was, but as she stepped onto the sidewalk, tearing a piece of bread into tiny pieces and pressing them gently against Charlie's lips, she knew one thing for certain. She had given them names, and now she had to find a way to keep them alive. The seasons passed in a blur of struggle and survival, each day bleeding into the next with the same unrelenting routine. Searching, scavenging, and shielding 3 fragile lives against the harsh world that had never made room for them. The children grew, not in the way other children did, with birthdays marked by candles on cakes or laughter echoing through warm homes. but in the silent resilience of those who had no choice but to endure. Hunger became a familiar ache, a dull companion that never truly left. Cold nights were spent curled together beneath stairwells, in abandoned buildings, or in the forgotten corners of the city where the wind didn't bite quite as hard. Margaret did what she could. She held them when they shivered, whispered stories into the darkness to lull them to sleep, and rationed every crumb of food she could find. She knew hunger in a way only the truly desperate did, but for the first time in years, she feared it not for herself, but for them. Charlie was the first to change. He had been the strongest from the start, the first to cry in that alley, the first to kick against the cold. As he grew, so did his instincts, to protect, to fight, to make sure his small family survived. By the time he was 5, he had learned how to navigate the streets with a sharpness beyond his years. He watched Margaret closely, noting which places were best for finding food, which alleys were safest, and which people were more likely to offer help or harm. One evening, as Margaret tore a piece of bread into portions small enough to share, Charlie pushed his piece toward Sam without a word. Margaret noticed, but she didn't say anything. Neither did Sam, but Lily watched, her dark eyes taking in everything, filing it away as if the world itself was a puzzle she needed to solve. Sam remained small, quieter than the others. He was often sick, bouts of fever leaving him weak for days at a time, his ribs pressed against his skin, his steps slower than his siblings. Margaret worried about him constantly, pressing her palm against his forehead at night, listening to his breathing as he slept against her. Lily, though, was different. She had never been the loudest, never the first to demand attention. But she saw everything. The way Charlie squared his shoulders when a stranger passed too close. The way Margaret would turn her body slightly to shield them when they sat on the sidewalks, trying to disappear into the background of a world that didn't want them. One night, as they huddled together beneath an old fire escape, Charlie whispered, "I'll always take care of you." Margaret's heart clenched. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his job, that no child should have to bear the weight of responsibility so heavy, so soon, but words would not change the truth of their lives. So instead, she ran a hand through his tangled hair and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "I know you will," she murmured. The nights were the hardest. Margaret curled around them when the wind howled, her thin body offering what little warmth she could spare. The streets were cruel, filled with dangers she could not always protect them from. Drunken voices sometimes loomed too close. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. There were nights when fear kept her awake long after the children had fallen into exhausted sleep, her arms tightening around them as if sheer will alone could keep them safe. But no matter how cold the nights became, no matter how many days passed without enough food, Margaret knew one thing with certainty: they had nothing. But to them, she was everything. The night was colder than usual. The kind of cold that didn't just bite, it seeped into the bones, into the very marrow, lingering long after the wind had passed. Margaret had known cold all her life, but tonight it felt different, heavy, final. She had felt it creeping in for weeks now, the weight in her chest, the exhaustion that no amount of rest could shake. The coughing had worsened, deep and ragged, leaving her ribs aching. She had hidden it as best she could, forcing herself to smile when Charlie looked at her with those sharp, knowing eyes. He had always been too observant, and she couldn't let him see how bad it had become, but her body was failing. She had known hunger, pain, and exhaustion. She had fought against them, had willed herself to keep moving for the sake of the 3 fragile lives she had taken in. But this was something else, something she couldn't fight. That night she curled up against the children, pressing them close, as she always did. The old blanket she had scavenged barely covered them, but their bodies provided warmth, their breathing steady and soft against her skin. Charlie's arm was draped protectively over Sam, and Lily, as always, had tucked herself near Margaret's chest, as if sensing that this was the safest place to be. Margaret listened to the rhythm of their breaths. Her eyelids grew heavier, but she forced them open, just a little longer. Just until the morning. Charlie stirred beside her, shifting in his sleep, his brow furrowed as if something troubled him even in his dreams. She reached out, brushing a trembling hand over his hair, smoothing it down as she had done since he was a baby. She wanted to tell him he had done well, that she had seen the way he had grown, the way he had taken on burdens far beyond his years, that she was sorry for all the times he had gone hungry, for all the nights she hadn't been able to give them more. She wanted to tell him that she was proud, but the words never came. A deep cough racked her chest, tearing through her like broken glass. She pressed a hand against her lips, feeling the warmth of blood there, but there was no strength left in her to wipe it away. The world around her dimmed, the sounds fading, the cold growing distant. And then, nothing. Charlie awoke to the sharp bite of morning air. His first thought was the hunger, a familiar ache in his stomach, gnawing at him the way it always did. But then he noticed how still everything was. Too still. He turned his head, expecting to hear Margaret's soft murmurs, feel her warmth against him. But when he reached for her, his fingers met something colder than the air around them. He sat up abruptly. "Grandma?" His voice was small, uncertain. He shook her arm gently. She didn't move. Panic clawed at his chest as he shook her harder, his small hands gripping her shoulders. "Grandma, wake up!" Still nothing. His breathing quickened, his heart pounding against his ribs as he turned toward his siblings. "Lily," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Wake up!" Lily stirred, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She looked up at him, confused, then followed his gaze to Margaret's still form. Something in her face changed. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and touched Margaret's hand. The moment her fingers met the cold skin, she jerked back as if burned. "Grandma?" Her voice was barely audible. Charlie's chest tightened. Sam was the last to wake. He yawned, stretching his thin arms before blinking up at them. When he saw their faces, saw Lily's wide, fearful eyes and Charlie's tight grip on Margaret's sleeve, his small body tensed. "What's wrong?" Charlie couldn't answer. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. Lily let out a small choked sound, a sob she tried to swallow. She reached for Margaret's hand again, clutching it between her own, as if holding on tight enough could change what had already happened. But it couldn't. Margaret was gone, and for the first time, they were truly alone. The city did not stop for grief. Margaret was gone. The morning light crept through the cracks between the buildings, casting a pale, indifferent glow over the streets. The air was still sharp with winter's bite, but Charlie hardly felt it. His body was numb, his mind blank. There was no time to mourn, no time to process the aching, hollow space where Margaret had once been. The only thing that mattered now was surviving. He and his siblings wandered the streets with nowhere to go, no plan beyond putting one foot in front of the other. Hunger gnawed at them, their stomachs cramping from emptiness. But worse than that was the silence that stretched between them. Lily barely spoke. She walked close to Sam, her small hands gripping his arm as if afraid that if she let go, he might disappear too. Sam, too young to fully understand, kept glancing up at Charlie, waiting for him to fix things the way Margaret always had. But Charlie didn't know how. They tried asking for help. People passed by in thick coats, their faces turned away, their steps quick with purpose. When Charlie reached out, his voice raw, desperate, they hardly even looked at him. A man in a fine wool suit shoved past them without a word. A woman wrapped in a scarf pulled her purse closer as she stepped away. One man stopped, his eyes scanning the three of them, with something unreadable in his gaze. For a fleeting second, Charlie thought he might help, but then the man sighed, shaking his head. "Go somewhere else, kid." Charlie swallowed hard, his fingers curling into fists. By the time the sun began to set, they had given up trying. They wandered until their legs ached, until the weight of exhaustion pressed against their small frames. When night fell, the streets grew even colder, the wind cutting through their thin clothes like knives. Charlie found an alley that seemed safe enough, narrow, hidden from view. He motioned for Lily and Sam to sit, positioning himself at the edge, keeping his body between them and the open street. Lily pulled Sam close, wrapping her arms around him as best she could. "We'll be okay," she whispered, though her voice wavered. Sam didn't respond. His breathing was slow, uneven. Charlie swallowed the lump in his throat. He had to be strong. He had to keep them safe. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he could. The city kept moving. How many people passed that alley? How many glimpsed 3 children curled against the cold and chose to look away? Would you? The hunger was unbearable. Charlie had thought he understood what it meant to be hungry, but this was different. This wasn't the dull ache that came from missing a meal or two. This was something deeper, sharper, something that made his limbs weak, his head light, his vision blur at the edges. They hadn't eaten in 2 days. Sam could barely sit up, his small body curled against Lily's side, his skin burning with fever despite the frigid air. Lily had given him her jacket the night before, draping it over him in a desperate attempt to keep him warm. But it was too thin to make any real difference. Charlie clenched his fists. He had to do something. He had tried asking for help. That had led to nothing but cold stares and dismissive hands waving him away. Now, as he stood on the sidewalk outside a bakery, the smell of fresh bread filling the air, there was only one option left. He wasn't proud of it. Margaret had always told him to be good, to be honest. But Margaret was gone, and honesty didn't fill empty stomachs. His eyes darted to the display window, where golden loaves sat stacked behind the glass, their crusts crisp, their insides soft and warm. His stomach twisted violently at the sight. He had watched people come and go, had counted how long the baker, an older man with a permanent scowl, turned his back to knead the dough. He just needed a few seconds. Taking a deep breath, he slipped inside, moving as quietly as he could. His fingers found the edge of a loaf, still warm from the oven. He hesitated only for a second, then snatched it and turned to run. He didn't make it 2 steps before a rough hand grabbed the back of his shirt. "You little thief!" The force yanked him backward, and he crashed to the floor, the loaf tumbling from his grasp. The next thing he knew, the baker's heavy boot connected with his ribs. Pain exploded through his side, stealing the breath from his lungs. "You think you can just take from me?" The baker's voice was a growl, filled with something deeper than anger, contempt. Charlie tried to scramble away, but the man grabbed him by the collar and hauled him up, shaking him like a rag doll. "Please," he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "My brother, he's sick. We just—" Another blow cut him off. His cheek slammed against the counter, the stale scent of flour filling his nose. He had known people could be cruel. Margaret had warned him, but nothing could have prepared him for this. By the time the baker finally let him go, Charlie could barely stand. His legs shook as he stumbled out of the shop, his ribs throbbing, his lips split and bleeding. He had failed. When he reached the alley where Lily and Sam were waiting, he could already see the worry in Lily's eyes. She didn't ask what happened. She just took one look at his face and knew. Charlie sank down beside her, his head resting against the cold brick wall. "I tried," he whispered. Lily didn't say anything. She just took his trembling hand and squeezed it, her own fingers ice cold. A weak whimper came from Sam. His fever had worsened. His skin was damp with sweat, his breath shallow. Charlie's stomach twisted, not from hunger this time, but from something worse. What if Sam didn't make it? What if he and Lily were all that was left? He swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in his eyes. He couldn't think like that. It was then that a shadow moved at the entrance of the alley. Charlie tensed, ready to run, but the figure that appeared wasn't a threat. She was older, with kind eyes and graying hair tucked beneath a worn wool hat. She carried a small cloth bundle in her hands, her movements careful, hesitant. "I saw what happened back there," she said softly, kneeling in front of them. "That man, he had no right to do that." Charlie didn't respond. He just stared at her, wary. The woman unwrapped the bundle, revealing a piece of bread. Not fresh, not whole, but more than they had. "Here," she extended it toward them. "Eat." Charlie's fingers twitched, but he didn't reach for it. He wanted to trust her, but he had learned too much in the past few days. The woman must have seen the hesitation in his eyes because she sighed, a sadness flickering across her face. "Not everyone who offers kindness truly means it," she murmured, "but that doesn't mean you stop looking for the ones who do." Lily, watching silently, reached out first. She took the bread and tore it into 3 pieces, placing the smallest bit against Sam's lips. Charlie's stomach ached as he ate, but he forced himself to slow down. He had learned the hard way that food, once gone, might not come again soon. The woman stood, brushing off her knees. "I can't do much," she admitted, her voice soft, "but I hope this helps." Then, just as quietly as she had come, she turned and walked away. Charlie watched her go, his chest tight. The world was cruel. But maybe, not always. The night was cruel. The rain came suddenly, a cold, relentless downpour that soaked through their thin clothes within minutes. Charlie tried to shield Sam and Lily as best he could, his arms stretching over them like a makeshift shelter. But the water found its way in anyway, dripping down their faces, chilling them to the bone. Sam barely stirred. His fever had worsened, his small body trembling against Lily's side. He needed warmth. He needed real food, not the scraps they had been surviving on. Charlie clenched his jaw. He had failed once already. He wouldn't fail again. His eyes scanned the streets, searching for anything, any opportunity, any kindness, any moment of carelessness that would allow him to take what they needed. He had to find food. That was when the man appeared. He was older, with graying hair and a thick coat that looked warm and dry. His voice was gentle, almost kind, as he crouched down to their level, offering them a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You poor kid," he murmured, shaking his head. "Out here all alone in this weather?" Charlie stiffened immediately. He knew that look, that voice. Too kind, too interested. But before he could pull his siblings back, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in a napkin. He peeled back the paper, revealing half of a sandwich. Fresh, thick. The smell of meat and cheese was intoxicating. Charlie could hear Lily's breath catch, could feel the way Sam shifted, his body instinctively moving toward the food. "I have more," the man said. His voice was soft, almost coaxing. "A warm place to stay too. Just a few blocks away. You shouldn't be out here like this." Charlie stepped forward, placing himself between the man and his siblings. "We're fine," he said, his voice sharp, steady. The man's smile faltered just for a second. "You don't look fine, son." His eyes flicked over Charlie's ragged clothes, his bruised cheek from the bakery beating. "You look like you could use some help." Charlie shook his head. The man sighed as if disappointed. Then he turned to Sam. "You must be hungry," he said, his voice dripping with concern. "Here, kid, just take a bite." Sam hesitated. Charlie's pulse roared in his ears. No. He didn't know exactly why, but every instinct inside him screamed that this was wrong, that this man was wrong. He grabbed Sam's wrist, pulling him back. "We said no." The warmth in the man's expression vanished. For a moment, he just stood there, the sandwich still in his hand, his lips pressed into a thin line. Then he let out a slow breath, tucked the food back into his coat, and stood up. "Suit yourself," he muttered. Then just before walking away, he glanced at Sam one last time. "Stay safe, kid." Charlie didn't move until the man had disappeared down the street. Only then did he turn to Lily and Sam. "Never go with anyone," he said, his voice harsh, urgent. "Not ever." Lily nodded, her eyes wide. Sam just looked down, silent. The rain kept falling, heavier now, colder. Charlie had to get food. "I'll be back," he said suddenly. "Stay here no matter what." Lily's head snapped up. "Where are you going?" "I have to," he swallowed. "Just stay here." And then he ran. The streets were slick with rain, his clothes clinging to his skin as he darted through alleyways toward the marketplace where vendors had begun packing up for the night. He could still smell the bread, the fruit, the roasted meat. He didn't think. He just acted. He grabbed an apple from a cart and turned to run. A hand clamped down on his arm before he could take another step. "You little thief!" Charlie thrashed, trying to break free, but the grip was iron strong. A second hand grabbed his collar, yanking him backward. He kicked out, desperate, but it was useless. "Let me go!" he yelled, but no one listened. Within minutes, he was shoved into the back of a police car. Through the rain-streaked window, he saw the city blur past, the streets growing more distant, until the only thing left was the flashing red and blue of the patrol car's lights. Lily and Sam. He had left them behind. and now he had no way back. Lily sat in the alley, her arms wrapped tightly around Sam's frail body. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the cold was still relentless. The puddles reflected the city lights, distorting them into something hazy, unreal. Charlie had been gone too long. She wanted to believe he was coming back, that any moment now he would appear, soaked and shivering but triumphant, holding food in his hands. But deep in her chest, a terrible, suffocating feeling told her otherwise. Something had gone wrong. A sob escaped her lips, and she pressed her forehead against Sam's damp hair. For the first time in her life, she was truly, utterly alone. Gray floors, gray ceilings, gray uniforms. A world drained of color, of warmth, of anything that resembled life. Charlie had never been in a place like this before. The juvenile detention center was not a home, not a school, not a place where people looked after kids who had lost their way. It was a cage filled with wolves, and he was fresh meat. His first day, they threw him into a shared cell with 4 other boys, each of them older, bigger, and hungry, not for food but for dominance. They circled him like a wounded animal, eyes gleaming with something sharp, something cruel. A shove from behind sent him sprawling onto the hard floor. "Look what we got here," one of them sneered. Charlie scrambled to his feet, but before he could react, a fist collided with his ribs, knocking the breath from his lungs. Another blow struck his face, his vision blurring as he hit the floor again. Pain. He had felt it before. The cold, the hunger, the ache of going days without food. But this was different. This was punishment. Not for stealing, not for being caught, but for being weak. The guards didn't care. They walked past as if nothing was happening, eyes glazed over, indifferent. They had seen it all before. Charlie learned fast. He learned that you don't cry, you don't beg, you don't let them see the fear in your eyes. He kept his head down, took the hits when they came, and tried to disappear. But disappearing wasn't an option, not in a place like this, because Victor had noticed him. Victor was everything Charlie feared becoming, tall, unshaken. His presence alone was enough to make others step aside. He wasn't just another boy trapped in the system. He was the one who ran it. His word was law, his approval the difference between survival and suffering. And for some reason, he saw something in Charlie. "You've got fight in you," Victor said one evening, his voice smooth, almost amused. Charlie didn't answer. He had learned not to. Victor smirked. "You'll learn," he said, "one way or another." Charlie wanted to resist. He wanted to cling to the boy he had been, the boy Margaret had raised, the boy who had tried to protect his brother and sister. But Margaret was dead. Sam and Lily were gone, and every time he tried to stay out of the violence, it found him anyway. One night, 2 boys cornered him in the showers. He never learned their names. Never had to. Their fists did all the talking. The next morning, Victor sat beside him in the cafeteria, watching as Charlie struggled to lift a spoon with his bruised hands. "I could have stopped that, you know," Victor said. Charlie stared at the gray tray of food in front of him, untouched. Victor leaned in. "You want to survive in here?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Then stop pretending you're different." Charlie wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he would never be like them, that he still had something left inside him. But then he thought of Sam's frail body shivering in the rain, of Lily's wide, terrified eyes as he left, of the world that had taken everything from him and never once cared, and something shifted. The next time a boy shoved him, Charlie shoved back. The next time a punch was thrown, he didn't just take it, he returned it. The next time Victor called, Charlie listened. And little by little, piece by piece, the boy who had once tried to do what was right, the boy who had once believed in kindness, began to disappear. In his place, something harder, colder, and unbreakable took root. The world had swallowed Sam whole. One moment, he had been sitting in the alley, shivering, waiting for Charlie to come back. The next, rough hands had grabbed him, pulling him away from Lily, away from the only thing familiar. His cries had been muffled by a cloth pressed over his face, the scent sickly sweet, making his head spin. His last memory before the darkness took him was the distant echo of Lily's scream. When he woke up, he was somewhere else. The air was thick with dust, heavy with the scent of rust and sweat. Dim, flickering bulbs cast long shadows against the damp concrete walls. The room was filled with other children, their small bodies bent over sewing machines, hands moving with practiced mechanical efficiency. Their faces were blank, hollow, eyes downcast. A sharp voice rang out. "Get up!" A boot nudged his side. Sam flinched, his body already aching, even though he hadn't done anything yet. He turned his head slowly and saw a man standing over him. Broad shoulders, a permanent scowl, a clipboard tucked under one arm. "You work, you eat," the man said, his tone flat. "You don't. You starve." Sam sat up, disoriented. His body felt weak, fever still clinging to him. He didn't understand what was happening, but his instincts told him one thing. This was not a place where kindness existed. The man gestured to an open space at one of the long tables, where rows of children worked in silence. "Move!" Sam's legs felt like lead as he stood, his balance unsteady. No one looked at him as he shuffled forward. No one spoke. He sank onto the wooden stool, his fingers trembling as he reached for a scrap of fabric. The girl beside him, maybe a few years older, didn't turn her head, but she whispered under her breath, "Don't fall behind." Sam's throat tightened. He tried to work, but his fingers were clumsy, unfamiliar with the needle and thread. The moment his stitches went crooked, a hard smack landed across his shoulder. "Faster!" a voice growled behind him. The pain sent a jolt through his body, but he forced himself to keep going. Hours passed. Maybe days. Time blurred together, lost in the endless cycle of stitching, pulling, cutting, folding. The only moments of rest came when a metal bucket was passed around with small portions of watery soup, barely enough to quiet the gnawing hunger. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know if Lily was safe. And Charlie? Sam blinked hard, forcing himself not to cry. Charlie was strong. He would find him. He just had to hold on. The first time he tried to escape, he barely made it past the main door before a guard yanked him back. The second time, he got farther. A glimpse of the outside, a street, a chance. But a rough hand caught the back of his shirt, dragging him to the ground. This time, they didn't just hit him. They made sure he wouldn't try again. He spent 2 days lying on the cold floor, his ribs aching, his lips swollen, his stomach empty. When he was finally able to stand, he didn't run anymore. He worked. The others didn't look at him with pity. They all understood. Hope was dangerous. Hope got you hurt. Maybe this was just his fate. Maybe he had been born to be nothing more than a forgotten name in a forgotten place. He thought of Margaret, of the way she had held him when he was little, her voice soft even when the world was cruel. Would she want him to give up? Would Charlie? Would Lily? Sam swallowed hard, his fingers curling into fists. He didn't know how. He didn't know when. But he would find a way out. The years passed, but Lily never forgot. She had been just a child the night everything fell apart. The night Charlie vanished into the back of a police car. The night Sam was stolen away by hands she couldn't fight off. She had screamed for them until her throat was raw, until the city swallowed her cries, indifferent as always. And then, just like that, she was alone. But she survived. She learned quickly, learned which alleyways were safest to sleep in, which storefronts wouldn't chase her away when she lingered too long. She learned how to move unseen, how to disappear when danger loomed too close. And most of all, she learned to listen. People talked, in bars, on street corners, in whispered conversations they thought no one else could hear. And over the years, she gathered pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was building. Charlie was alive. She didn't know how, didn't know where, but she had heard his name once, spoken in passing between two men outside a dingy pool hall. They had said it with something close to respect, something close to fear. And Sam. She had chased rumor after rumor, always ending in dead ends. A boy matching his description seen working in the back of a factory. A kid who had escaped a labor camp only to vanish again. Nothing solid, nothing real. But she refused to believe he was gone, so she kept searching. She had grown in those years, no longer the wide-eyed girl clutching a thin jacket against the cold. Her face was sharper now, her eyes harder. Her body still carried the weight of hunger, but her mind was sharp. She had purpose, and that purpose led her deeper into the city's underbelly, to places she once would have been too afraid to step foot in. The first time she heard Victor's name, it was spoken in low, careful tones. She was sitting in the back of a diner, nursing a cup of coffee she had stolen from an empty table, listening. "Victor's got a new guy," one man muttered to the other, stirring his drink absently. "Tough kid. Came up through juvie. You don't want to cross him." Lily's breath caught. She leaned in just slightly, careful not to draw attention. "Yeah?" The other man grunted. "What's his name?" The first man smirked. "They call him Charlie." Lily felt her fingers tighten around the ceramic cup. Charlie. It had to be him. It had to be. She forced herself to stay still, to listen, to think. Victor. That was the key. Whoever he was, he had Charlie. And if she could find him, she could find her brother. She spent the next few weeks trailing whispers. She lurked in the shadows of gambling dens, listened outside warehouse doors, followed men who spoke in low voices, and carried themselves with the weight of power. Victor wasn't just a name, he was a presence. A man who controlled more than just the streets, a man who made things disappear. She didn't realize as she pieced together his world that someone had begun to notice her, that as she listened, someone was listening to her, that the city wasn't as indifferent as it seemed, and that she was no longer invisible. The club was buried deep beneath the city, hidden in a place where the air smelled of liquor, sweat, and quiet danger. It wasn't the kind of place where people wandered in by accident. The men here didn't just own the night, they ruled it. Lily moved carefully through the dimly lit room, her pulse steady despite the weight pressing against her chest. She had followed whispers, traced shadows, hunted through back alleys and nameless streets to find this place, to find him, Charlie, her brother. She spotted him near the bar, leaning back in a leather booth, a cigarette dangling between his fingers. The soft glow of neon lights flickered across his face, illuminating sharp angles and a cold expression that didn't belong to the boy she remembered. He looked older, harder. His body had filled out, no longer the thin, hungry child she had once clung to for warmth. The bruises of survival had healed into something permanent, something unrecognizable. A man stood beside him, murmuring something close to his ear. Charlie gave a slow nod, exhaling smoke before flicking the cigarette onto the floor. The man walked away without another word. Lily swallowed. She had played this moment over in her mind 1,000 times, rehearsed the words she would say, imagined the moment he would see her and remember. But now, standing here, she realized something with a sharp, sinking dread. Charlie had already forgotten. She forced her feet forward. When she reached his booth, he didn't look up right away. She cleared her throat, barely above a whisper. Charlie. That name had once meant everything to him. Now it meant nothing. His gaze lifted, slow, detached. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his face unreadable, and then finally he spoke. You shouldn't be here. Lily felt her stomach tighten. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he said them. Flat, impassive, as if she were a stranger, as if she didn't matter. You're alive, she whispered, gripping the edge of the table, as if holding on to something solid would stop the ground from tilting beneath her. He took a long breath, leaning back, watching her with an eerie kind of patience. I was always alive, and he said, you were just too late to find me. The cold in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't the brother who had shielded her from the wind, who had whispered promises in the dark when they had nothing else. This wasn't her Charlie. What happened to you? She asked, her voice barely above a breath. Charlie exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the table. The past is dead, he said. So is our family. Lily flinched as if he had struck her. No. She shook her head, her nails digging into her palm. You're lying. I don't care what this place has done to you. I know who you are. His jaw tightened. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes, but it was gone before she could name it. You knew who I was, he corrected. That kid is gone. Lily's throat burned. but she refused to let the tears fall. "You're still my brother," she said, "and I'm not leaving without you." Silence stretched between them. And then, Charlie laughed. Not a warm laugh, not the laugh she remembered. This one was sharp, empty, mocking. "You think you can pull me back?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You think I'm still waiting for you? For rescue?" He leaned in, his voice dropping low. "There's nothing to save, Lily." Lily clenched her fists. "I don't believe that." For a fraction of a second, his mask cracked. Just barely. Then just as quickly, it was back. "You should," he said, leaning back. "It'll make it easier when you finally give up." Lily wouldn't. Not on him, not ever. Lily had spent years searching for the truth. She had combed through whispers in dark alleys, traced the edges of shadows cast by men who operated in silence. She had followed leads that led to nowhere, grasping at threads too fragile to hold. But now, standing outside a grand building, its towering windows glowing against the night, she finally had it. Victor. The name had always lingered just beyond reach, a specter hiding in the underbelly of the city. But now it was no longer just a name. It was a man. And he had destroyed her family. She had pieced it together through overheard conversations, fragments of the past slipping through the lips of men who thought she was nobody. The truth had been there all along, buried under years of suffering. Victor had been the one who ordered their abandonment. He hadn't just let them go. He had made sure they disappeared. And Charlie had known. The realization hit her harder than any winter night she had endured alone. It made her stomach churn, her breath shake. She needed to hear it from him. She needed to know why. She found Charlie in the same club, sitting in the same dark corner, draped in the same cold detachment. Only this time, when she approached, he didn't look surprised. He was waiting. She slammed her hands onto the table, her heart pounding. "You knew." Charlie didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He just sighed, exhaling smoke from a cigarette that burned lazily between his fingers. "I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out." Lily's throat tightened. "You knew Victor was the one who left us in that alley, the one who took everything from us. And you still stayed by his side?" Charlie took another drag, his expression unreadable. "There was nothing left to take," he said simply. Lily's vision blurred with rage. "How can you say that? How can you just accept it?" A flicker of something crossed his face, a crack in the armor, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. "Because fighting it doesn't change anything." His voice was quiet but sharp. "It doesn't bring Margaret back. It doesn't undo what happened to Sam. It doesn't fix you or me." Lily's hands trembled. "So what?" she demanded. "You just gave up. You just joined him?" Charlie exhaled, shaking his head. "I survived," he corrected. "That's what you don't understand, Lily. There was no winning, no escaping. There was just this world or death, and I chose to live." Lily took a step back, her breath coming too fast. "No," she whispered. "You didn't choose this. He made you believe it was the only way." Charlie's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Lily swallowed hard, her voice shaking. "I don't care how far you've fallen. I don't care how much you try to push me away. I am not letting Victor get away with this." For the first time, Charlie's gaze lifted to meet hers. Really meet hers. "You think you're the first person who's wanted to take him down?" His voice was low, warning. "You think you can touch him?" "I'll do whatever it takes," she shot back. A heavy silence stretched between them. Then Charlie leaned in, his voice a whisper. "You won't get the chance." Lily's stomach dropped. A presence loomed behind her. The shift of movement, the weight of a shadow pressing against her back. Charlie's gaze didn't move from hers, but the meaning was clear. She was being watched. She had been for a long time, and Victor had just decided she was a problem that needed to be solved. Lily knew she had made a mistake the moment she turned around. The men behind her weren't just Victor's lackeys. They were killers. The kind who didn't hesitate. The kind who followed orders without question. Two of them flanked the exit, cutting off her way out. Another lingered just behind Charlie, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. The air in the club shifted, the low hum of conversation fading as the weight of something dark settled over the room. Victor had been expecting this. And so had Charlie. Lily's chest tightened as she looked at her brother, really looked at him. His face was unreadable, his body still, but she could see it, the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers curled slightly against the table. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even alarmed, because he had already known how this would end. From the moment she walked into his world, from the moment she spoke his name, Victor had made his decision, and now he was forcing Charlie to make his. A slow, deliberate set of footsteps echoed across the floor. The men parted, and there he was. Victor. He wasn't a towering man, wasn't physically imposing, but power clung to him like a second skin, radiating from him in a way that made even the most dangerous men in the room shrink back. He smoothed a hand over his cufflinks, looking from Charlie to Lily as if they were merely pieces on a board. "She's persistent," he said, his voice almost amused. "I'll give her that." Charlie said nothing. Victor let the silence stretch before sighing, shaking his head as if disappointed. "I should have had her taken care of the moment she started asking questions." His gaze flicked to Lily, cold and clinical. "But I suppose that mistake can be corrected." Lily stiffened. She wasn't afraid to die. She had survived too much, fought too hard, to fear the end. But this wasn't just about her. This was about Charlie, and she wasn't leaving without him. Victor turned back to Charlie, his expression expectant. "You know how this works." Still, Charlie didn't speak. Victor's lips curled into something that almost resembled a smile. "So let's make it simple." He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "Your sister is a problem. You know it. I know it. She's digging where she shouldn't, and I don't have time for loose ends." The men behind Lily moved closer. Victor's voice softened, almost gentle. "So, Charlie, you're going to fix it." Lily's blood ran cold. Victor's hand reached into his coat. For a split second, she thought he was pulling a gun, but instead he placed something on the table between them. A knife. Sleek, sharp, clean, a test, a final proof of loyalty. Charlie's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Victor sighed. "You know how this works," he repeated. "You want to be part of this family? Then you clean up its messes?" Lily swallowed hard. She could see it, the way Charlie's fingers twitched, the way his breath had grown, slightly uneven. This wasn't just an order. It was the moment that would define who he was. She stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to do this." Charlie's eyes flicked to hers just for a second. Victor laughed under his breath. "Oh, Lily," he mused. "Still clinging to fairy tales?" He tilted his head at Charlie. "Your brother made his choice a long time ago." Lily ignored him. She focused on Charlie, the boy who had once held her hand when she was scared, the boy who had whispered to her in the dark, promising that they would always be together, the boy she refused to believe was gone. "You still have a choice," she said softly. Charlie's fingers curled into fists. For a long moment, nothing moved. And then, something cracked. It was small, barely visible, a flicker of hesitation, a shift in his breathing, and Lily knew. She had reached him. Even if it was just for a second, even if he didn't realize it yet, something inside him wasn't lost. Victor saw it too. His expression darkened, his amusement vanishing. "Don't make me question you, Charlie." His voice was quiet, but the threat was clear. Charlie's hands clenched at his sides. Lily held her breath. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. For years, he had told himself that choice was an illusion, that survival meant obedience, that he had no other path. But Lily was here, standing in front of him, unafraid, refusing to accept the man he had become. And somewhere inside him, a part of Charlie still existed, a part that remembered who he was before Victor, a part that remembered her. Victor exhaled, shaking his head as if bored. "You're wasting my time, kid," he muttered. "Make a decision, or I'll make it for you." Something snapped. Charlie's hand shot forward, not for the knife, but for the gun at Victor's waist. In an instant, the room exploded into chaos. A gunshot rang out, shattering the tension like glass. The men in the room jolted, reaching for their own weapons, but Charlie was faster. He whipped the pistol up, slamming the barrel against Victor's temple and knocking him back. "Get down!" Charlie barked at Lily, shoving her toward cover as bullets tore through the air. The club erupted into violence. Tables overturned, glass shattered, bodies slammed into walls. Victor's men scrambled, some firing blindly, others trying to flee. Victor staggered back, gripping the side of his head where Charlie had struck him. His lips curled into something between rage and amusement. "So, this is how it is?" he sneered. Charlie didn't answer. He already knew the answer. He had spent years telling himself he owed Victor his life, that he had no choice but to follow. But standing here now, gun in his hands, his sister behind him, he realized he had never been more wrong. Victor's smirk faltered. "You think you can just walk away?" Charlie's grip on the gun tightened. "I'm not walking." His voice was cold, final. "I'm taking you down." Victor lunged. Charlie didn't hesitate. He swung the gun upward, firing. The bullet hit Victor's shoulder, sending him stumbling back with a snarl of pain. His men, those still standing, hesitated, uncertain. Their leader, the man they had feared for years, was bleeding, weak, and then sirens. The distant wail of police cars tore through the chaos, growing louder by the second. The club's front doors burst open, armed officers pouring in. "Drop your weapons!" Victor's empire was crumbling. The men who had once sworn loyalty to him now scrambled to escape, tossing their guns aside, pushing past each other in desperation. Charlie turned back to Victor, who stood frozen, breathing hard. The fight was over. Victor's empire was gone. "You were nothing without me," Victor hissed. Charlie exhaled, his hands steady, his mind clear. "No," he said, his voice calm for the first time in years. "I was nothing because of you." The officers closed in. Victor didn't resist, and just like that, it was over. Charlie turned. Lily was there staring at him, not with fear, not with judgment, but with something softer, something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. For the first time in a long, long time, he let himself believe in it too. The night air was thick and heavy, pressing down on the abandoned industrial zone at the edge of the city. Clouds smothered the moon, leaving the world in darkness. The faint hum of distant machinery vibrated through the ground, carrying with it the scent of oil, rust, and despair. Lily tightened her coat around herself, but the cold she felt had nothing to do with the weather. Sam was here. She could feel it. Charlie stood beside her, eyes scanning the crumbling warehouse, his body tense. The concrete walls were stained with time, the broken windows gaping like hollow eyes. "You sure?" Charlie whispered. Lily nodded, her heart pounding. "I heard it straight from them. Sam is inside." Charlie exhaled slowly. His sharp gaze caught the men loitering near the entrance. These weren't regular guards. They were Victor's men, the kind who thrived in the dark, the kind who sold lives as if they were nothing more than numbers on a ledger. Charlie clenched his fists. He used to be one of them, but not anymore. They moved like shadows, slipping through a rusted side door. Inside, the air was thick with heat, sweat, and exhaustion. Lily felt her stomach turn. The children, so many of them, bent over wooden tables, their frail hands moved mechanically, sewing, stitching, cutting under the dim yellowed light. Their fingers were cracked, blistered, and raw. No one spoke. No one dared look up. It was a graveyard where the living never screamed. Charlie scanned the room. Then he saw him, Sam, huddled in a dark corner, nothing but skin and bones. His frame was too small, too fragile. His skin was sickly pale, his hands trembling as he stitched a piece of fabric. His eyes were empty. Charlie's breath caught in his throat. He had seen broken men before, but seeing it in his little brother? Lily moved first. "Sam!" The boy flinched. A single thread snapped beneath his fingers. Slowly, so slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes found Lily's. For a moment, nothing. Then, his lips parted, his breath catching. "Lily!" His voice was a fragile whisper, hoarse from silence. Lily collapsed beside him, pulling him into her arms, her tears spilling over. "I'm here, Sam," she whispered, choking on the words. "I'm here. We're taking you home." Sam's body trembled. A sound escaped him, a broken sob, something trapped inside him for too long. But there was no time to cry. Bang! A door slammed open. Angry voices. The guards had noticed them. Charlie yanked Sam up, gripping him tight. "Run!" But Sam was too weak. He stumbled after just a few steps. Charlie cursed under his breath. "Lily, help me!" Lily grabbed Sam's arm, trying to hold him up. "Come on, Sam, we need to move!" His legs gave out. Tears filled his eyes. I can't." Charlie's face hardened. Then, without a second thought, he lifted Sam onto his back. "Hold on," he ordered. Sam clung to him, weak fingers gripping his brother's jacket. The men were getting closer. Boots slammed against the concrete. Charlie ran, his breath burning in his lungs. But up ahead, the exit was blocked. Lily looked around frantically. There had to be a way. Then she saw it. "The window!" she shouted, pointing up. Charlie didn't hesitate. He climbed onto a wooden crate, pushing Sam up first. "Go!" Lily grabbed Sam, practically shoving him through the window. Then, a hand grabbed Charlie's arm. They had him. Lily screamed. Charlie reacted instantly. He spun, slamming his elbow into the man's jaw. But two more men rushed at him. Lily didn't think. She grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and swung. Crack! One of the men stumbled back, cursing in pain. Charlie didn't waste the moment. He punched the second man square in the face, knocking him down. Then, without looking back, without thinking, he launched himself through the window. Lily followed. They hit the cold ground outside, gasping for breath. Sirens wailed in the distance. The guards, realizing they were outmatched, scattered. Sam, shaking and exhausted, let out a choked sob. But it wasn't fear, it was relief. Charlie dropped to his knees beside him. For the first time in years, he was no longer the hardened man Victor had shaped. He was just a brother. He pulled Sam into his arms, holding him tight. "I should have found you sooner," Charlie whispered, his voice raw. Sam clung to him, tears soaking into his jacket. "You're here now," Sam murmured, his voice breaking. Charlie tightened his arms around him, and for the first time in over a decade, he knew he would never let go. The building wasn't much at first, a worn-down brick structure on the edge of the city, the kind most people passed without a second glance. The windows were old, the walls carried the weight of years, and the roof leaked when the rain came too hard. But to them, it was everything. Hope Haven. The name hung above the doorway in bold, fresh letters, painted by hand. It wasn't just a shelter. It wasn't just a place. It was a promise. A promise to the children who had no one. A promise to those the world had cast aside. A promise that no one would be left behind again. Inside, the space had been transformed. The once empty rooms were now filled with beds, warm blankets, and tables big enough for family dinners, the kind they had never had. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, a scent that wrapped around them like a memory. And the laughter. That was the biggest change of all. Lily stood near the doorway, watching as a group of children, their children now, huddled together over bowls of hot soup, giggling between bites. A little girl with tangled curls clutched a stuffed bear, smiling for the first time in who knew how long. A boy, no older than Sam had been when he was taken, whispered something to Charlie, who ruffled his hair in response. It felt unreal. A lifetime ago, they had been those kids, hungry, cold, forgotten, and now they were the ones saving them. Sam sat at the far end of the table, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. His body was still thin, still recovering, but his eyes were brighter than they had been in years. As if sensing Lily's gaze, he looked up and gave her a small, hesitant smile. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "Did we really make it out?" Charlie, standing beside him, let out a soft exhale. His scars, both seen and unseen, were still there, but the weight on his shoulders was different now. Lighter. Lily stepped forward, placing a hand on Sam's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. She smiled. "Yes," she said. "And now, we'll help others do the same." For the first time in their lives, they were home. Life has a way of breaking people. It tests them, bends them, pushes them to the edge until they are forced to make a choice, become what hurt them, or rise above it. Charlie, Sam, and Lily were abandoned, left to survive in a world that saw them as nothing. They were shaped by pain, by hunger, by the brutal reality of the streets. Yet when the moment came, when they could have let their past define them, they chose differently. Charlie could have remained in the darkness. He was taught that power meant control, that survival meant following orders without question. But in the end, he broke free. He proved that even the most hardened hearts could find their way back to the light. Sam could have faded into nothingness, swallowed by years of suffering. He had every reason to stop fighting, to give in to despair. But he was saved, not just by his siblings, but by the simple, undeniable truth that he was still worth saving. And Lily, she was the thread that held them together. Through every hardship, every loss, she never stopped believing in the power of family. Even when it seemed impossible, even when Charlie pushed her away, she fought for them. This story is more than just a tale of survival. It's about choice. We are not just products of our pain. We are not just the sum of what has been done to us. We are what we choose to become. So ask yourself, do you believe people can truly change? Can someone who has lost their way find redemption? Or does the past always hold them captive? Share your thoughts. We want to hear from you. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of something or someone, don't let it end here. Like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that matter. Because somewhere out there, in the shadows of a forgotten street, another child is waiting for their chance. And maybe, just maybe, we can help them find it.